Hello, I'm Tracy Wallach. This is part 3 of a series of lectures on systems psychodynamic theory. Parts 1 and 2 talked about open systems theory and psychoanalytic theory. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about the work of Wilfred Bion and specifically the concept of basic assumptions. Bion was a British psychoanalyst who was working at the Tavistock Clinic in London in the 1940s. He and others at the Tavistock Clinic were drafted into the Army during World War II and began working on new methods of officer selection, which he termed leaderless groups. He also developed a new approach for helping soldiers with post-traumatic stress, then known as shell shock. At the Northfield Military Hospital, he initiated the first Northfield experiment, in which patients were given responsibility for their own rehabilitation. This laid the groundwork for what later became therapeutic communities. After the war, Bion founded the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations and began conducting further experiments with groups. By the 1950s, when Bion had stopped his work with groups, Eric Miller, Eric Trist, and Harold Bridger took up that work and developed the field of group relations. Bion was interested in the relationship between the individual and the group. He suggested that membership in any group is inherently conflictual. On the one hand, we long to be part of something bigger than ourselves, to belong. But at the same time, we fear losing our individual identity in a group. Bion believed that individual members enter groups with their own personal rational and non-rational aims and needs, and employ psychosocial defenses such as splitting, projection, and projective identification in order to tolerate the powerful tensions of group life. These terms are explained in Lecture 2 of this series. The group serves as a sort of container for the various projections of individual group members and also takes on a life of its own as a consequence of these projections. The group as a whole becomes an entity much greater than the sum of its individual parts, with a character of its own. The group may find covert or unconscious ways of containing or managing its conflict or anxiety by using its members through processes of projective identification to contain difficult emotions, thoughts, or points of view on behalf of the group as a whole. That is, an individual member, a pair, or subgroup may be compelled through the processes of projective identification to take up a role to meet the unconscious needs of the group. Projective identification, you may recall from the second lecture, occurs when the recipient takes on and owns or identifies with a projection that has been put into them. Demographic characteristics such as age, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and physical characteristics each may serve as the basis for which certain members are ascribed particular roles. For example, women, based on cultural expectations, may be asked to take on caretaking roles on behalf of the larger group or to give voice to emotions in the group. Members of a particular ethnic group in a society may hold certain characteristics such as aggression or sexuality deemed intolerable by another ethnic group. Sometimes these projections get translated into policy or law. Using projective identification allows the group as a whole to maintain its equilibrium as long as it can continue to locate the problem in one individual member or subgroup. Group members, individually or in pairs or subgroups, act on behalf of the group as well as on their own behalf. The behavior of any group member at any moment is the expression of their own needs, history, and behavior patterns, and the need, history, and behavior patterns of the group as a whole. That is, how an individual acts in a group is a function both of their own personality and way of being in the world, as well as the group's influence on them. Groups function on many levels: formal and informal, overt and covert, conscious and unconscious. Bion noticed two main tendencies in the life of a group. The first is the tendency to work on a primary task or face and work with an agreed upon reality, which he called the work group mentality. It's also been referred to as W activity or work activity by Palmer and Reed. The second tendency, usually unconscious, is to avoid work on the primary task or avoid facing reality which the group fears may cause pain or psychological conflict within or between group members. Bion called this basic assumption mentality. It's also been referred to as S activity or survival activity. Lack of alignment or agreement or differing interpretations about BART, boundaries, authority, role, and task, particularly when unspoken, may result in anxiety and conflict. This creates an environment where basic assumption tendencies are more likely to take hold. On the basic assumption level of functioning, unconscious anxieties of the group lead the group to behave as if certain behaviors are vital to its survival, often to the detriment of its primary task. Basic assumption groups unconsciously assign leadership to those most able to help the group meet its unconscious survival needs and contain its anxiety. Basic assumption leaders collude with the group in avoiding reality. If they break this unconscious agreement, they may be replaced or evicted. In this way, basic assumption mentality simplifies complex issues and enables a group to manage its anxiety and internal conflict without having to actually address its difficult realities. Bion describes 3 types of basic assumptions in groups: dependency, fight-flight, and pairing. 3 additional basic assumptions have also been proposed by others: basic assumption oneness, basic assumption me-ness, and basic assumption purity pollution. Basic assumption groups are often off task or seem to be working on a task entirely different from its stated purpose or primary task. However, there are times when basic assumption behaviors may be mobilized on behalf of the group's primary task. Let's talk about the different types of basic assumption groups. In a dependency group, there is a culture of subordination and unquestioning obedience to authority. The formal leader or designated member is seen as having all the answers and is expected to take care of the group. The group may act as if it's stupid or incompetent. This pathological form of dependency inhibits growth and development. One example of basic assumption dependency is a team meeting in which most participants are passive, while one group member controls the meeting and makes all the decisions as the rest go along with it. In a classroom setting, this may occur in project groups where most members contribute nothing to the group project, counting on 1 or 2 members to do the lion's share of the work. Traditional classrooms are run on the assumption that the teacher is all-knowing and has all the answers, while students are empty vessels waiting to be filled up with the teacher's knowledge. Paulo Freire referred to this as the banking model of education. Dependency is not necessarily a negative. In a hospital setting, dependency works in service of the task. The patient on some level needs to be dependent on caretakers. In the operating room, there's a clear hierarchy with one person, usually the surgeon, in charge. On a societal level, Bion saw the institution of the church or other religious organization as holding dependency needs on behalf of the larger society. The second type of basic assumption is fight-flight. Here the group behaves as if there is a danger or an enemy from which it must flee or which it must attack. It is as if the group's survival depends upon destroying or evading the enemy, which can be a person, an institution, or idea which threatens it. There is a culture of paranoia and aggressive competitiveness. The group is preoccupied with an enemy, either external or within, and may spend time and energy worrying about rumors of change or protesting angrily without actually planning specific actions that progress their work task. The group engages in either fighting, active aggression, scapegoating, or physical attack, or flight from the task, withdrawal, passivity, avoidance, or ruminating on past history. Leadership may be bestowed on the one who either mobilizes the aggressive forces in the group or helps the group avoid facing the difficulty of the tasks ahead. In business, you may see evidence of fight-flight in conflicted or competitive relationships between departments or hierarchical levels, such as management versus line workers, or between subgroups within a department. The U.S. Congress is filled with examples of fight-flight mentality. For several years, much of the energy of each party has been on maligning the other one, to the detriment of achieving the primary task of governance. Bion saw the army as an example of fight-flight groups on a societal level. In this case, the S, or survival activity, is used in a way to further the group's task. The third type of basic assumption in groups is pairing. Here the group behaves as if its survival depends on producing a new leader, who may be a person, an institution, or an idea, who will deliver them from their current problems. The group's focus may be on some entity in the future as a defense against dealing with the difficulties of the present. Groups often produce pairs of members who are regarded as if they are potential parents of this new metaphorical messiah. The group may become inactive as it depends on the pair to do the group's work. A vague sense of hope replaces practical action in facing current difficulties. There is a culture of collusion in supporting pairs of members to avoid the truth. Bion believed that aristocracy is a prime example of pairing on a societal level. In the US, we have a fascination with celebrity culture. Who is dating, who is getting married or divorced or having children. You might say that our fascination with royalty and with celebrities is a way of avoiding some painful problems we face as a nation, such as deep economic disparities. The fourth basic assumption group added by Turkey describes a group where members seek to join in a powerful union with an omnipotent force, unobtainably high, to surrender self for passive participation and thereby to feel existence, well-being, and wholeness. In oneness groups, members act totally undifferentiated, as if there is no difference of opinion, let alone conflict within the group. Cult groups reflect this type of basic assumption functioning. The last basic assumption, Me-ness, was proposed by Lawrence, Bain, and Gould as a response to social anxieties and fears of living in modern, turbulent society. As a result of this anxiety, an individual is pressed more and more into their own inner reality in order to exclude and deny the perceived disturbing realities that are in their outer environment. A man's home is his castle. The group of people meeting in the same time and place denies that it is in fact a group. Group is perceived as something contaminating, impure, taboo, and in sum, all that is negative. The only reality to be considered and taken account of is that of the individual. It's a culture of selfishness in which individuals appear to be only conscious of their own personal boundaries, which they believe have to be protected from any incursion by others. In me-ness culture, the overriding anxiety is that the individual would be lost in any group that emerges. It is as if each individual was a self-contained group acting in its own right. An outsider coming in is made to feel that they are not making contact with any members of the group. They are isolated or alienated. This experience is a reflection of the fact that members are not psychically, politically, or spiritually present for each other. A sixth basic assumption of purity pollution related to the concept of caste was proposed by Chattopadhyay in 2019. Caste hierarchies establish the superiority or purity of one dominant group over the other. Basic assumption purity pollution groups behave as if their survival depends on keeping the higher or pure group or caste separated from the lower polluted ones. With this basic assumption, the impurities of the upper caste are projected onto the lower polluted castes. Chattopadhyay also notes that assumptions of purity and pollution can be based on class, gender, sexual orientation, or religion. Earlier in this lecture, I mentioned that Bion considered aristocracy to be a prime example of basic assumption pairing on a societal level. By contrast, Chattopadhyay proposed that the institution of marriage exemplifies pairing, and that aristocracy is actually indicative of basic assumption purity pollution. The notion of aristocracy having blue blood that must be kept pure persisted even after monarchy was constitutionally abolished in countries such as France, Spain, and Germany. Evidence of basic assumption, pollution, and purity can be found in the caste systems of India and other countries. White European colonization of the Americas, Australia, and the Indian subcontinent have left a legacy of caste hierarchy based on skin color and race. Nazi Germany and white supremacist ideologies in the US and Europe rationalized privilege for white minority groups under the guise of preserving the purity of bloodlines and white skin color. Chattopadhyay also sees evidence for basic assumption purity pollution in patriarchal systems and religious systems that view outsiders as impure, contaminated, or forbidden. This concludes part 3 of the series on systems psychodynamic theory. Thank you for joining me. For further reading on basic assumptions, please see the following references. For more information, please visit my website at www.tracywallach.com.